Thank you. Well, I'm Pastor Connie Winter-Yolberg, and I am a Christian. I'm Protestant, and I'm Lutheran, which means then we go all the way back to the Reformation in the 1500s. But my daughter is a seminary student, and so she and I were talking about this, and she reminded me about all the things that were happening right just prior to the Reformation. So I'm going to go back a little bit further, about 150 years before the Reformation, to what happened with Martin Luther. So prior to the Reformation, there first was a drought, and then there was a famine about 150 years prior to what was happening in early 1500s. And then there was also the 100 Years' War. And you can imagine what's going on at that point. So then lack of food, and then people then going from one place to another, also disease, that's all happening. Then what happened is, of course, the plague. It came about in 1347. And then there were several waves and then the plague happening over and over and over again. Some of you may know and have read Julian of Norwich. So she was the first woman who then, she wrote a book called Revelations of Divine Love. She was seen as she was an English hermit. And so what she did is separate herself from the rest of the culture, and she wrote and prayed. But she talked about in her writings that she actually survived 8 of the waves of that plague. And we believe that throughout all those waves of the plague, that there were about 1/2 of people in Europe actually died. We get that from the Vatican, who wrote down themselves how many people were died. And they were counting things like people, they were counting men, women, and children. They were counting the poor people as well as the rich people, even though the cities in Europe were only counting in their registries how many people who died who were rich men. And so we have some clear understanding by the Vatican records that 1/2 of the population of Europe had died during all those different waves of the plague. Unfortunately, for many people in Europe, what they were doing is they didn't know what was causing, why people were getting sick and dying, and why it was so horrible. They weren't able to figure out where it started and what was spreading the plague. And some people said that it was Jews. Now this is horrible, but I have to say that they finally figured out that it was rats, and that's why the plague was spreading. But pre-Martin Luther, and when Martin Luther then comes, and he is born in 1483, and then he had several other brothers and sisters, but 2 of his brothers died because of the plague. And so then he went to school in order to become a lawyer, but then he dropped out and joined a monastery. But his dad didn't like that, because then he already had lost 2 sons, and then one goes in the monastery. And so he's really not feeling good about that. But he finally said, okay, because he felt like, all right, then I sacrifice another male child, but I give this child to God. So please, God, let none of my other family members die. And that's what he came to. He went to be a priest, then he took a trip to Rome, and he became a teacher at the University of Erfurt, and then at the University of Wittenberg in Wittenberg, Germany. He started preaching at the city church in Wittenberg, and then he started talking. Now, he was somebody that did a lot of teaching and talking, and so if you would go to his house in Wittenberg, you'd get to see this pretty big room with a really long wooden table with all the chairs around it, and he would invite all the people there, all the students there, and they would have these kind of what they called table talks. But I need to tell you that his wife was a brewer, and she had the brewery in the basement. So all you need to do is that she would bring up beer from the basement. So you can imagine talks way into the night with people who were just drinking and eating and just talking theology and who God was and what the meaning of the world is and all of that kind of stuff. So he's there, and then what happens is that he has some issues with the Catholic Church. And I would say that I think the trip to Rome kind of did him in a bit, because looking at all that the Pope then at the time was trying to figure out, they were trying to, of course, build the St. Peter's Cathedral, and so then seeing all the poverty and realizing that Rome then wanted to build this huge then edifice. And then if you're talking about and thinking about, okay, all the pricey things that go into building that kind of church that we can now see nowadays still, realizing that, oh my gosh, how are we taking care of our own people? And so he had issues about that, but also issues about what they called indulgences, which is, and then if someone of your family members die, then you're supposed to pay money into so that they aren't in purgatory all so long. And so then you've got the priest then asking, if your family person dies, please pay this much money, and then if you pay this much money, then you're getting your family member, your beloved family member, out of purgatory in so many days. Of course you'd want to do that, but if you have to choose between health care or food and getting your loved one out of purgatory, you can see what was going on. So drought, famine, the war, and then the plague. And so then people are they're really feeling down. But Luther then said, okay, I've got these 95 things that I want to talk about. Let's have a discussion. And so then he wrote them all down and nailed them to one of the church doors. He nailed them to the castle church door in Wittenberg. And then, okay, well, there's a lot of things that happened then, of course, then. Well, the Catholic Church didn't really want to discuss that, and that the hammer kind of came down and said, all right, you really need to toe the line, and you need to be with us, and that there's nobody kind of dissenting on it. You are a priest, and so that you need to be with this. So what happened is that they excommunicated him. They were going to then try them, but before he went on this to see the person in charge, then there were people that kidnapped him and took him to Wartburg for safekeeping. And there he translated the New Testament into German, which was really, really helpful because the people couldn't read the Bible because they didn't read in either Latin or they didn't read in Koine Greek, which is what the New Testament is written in. And so that was really, really helpful. So then finally the people are then reading and saying, oh my gosh, this is what it really is. They could only hear what the Bible said by what the priest said. And then he went later on and published he was able to publish then an Old Testament in German so that people could read that. And of course then he died later on in 1546. Now, why I am Lutheran. I grew up a Lutheran, but I grew up a Missouri Synod Lutheran, which means that they still don't, they don't have women ministers. So, and I never saw a female Lutheran pastor before I went to seminary. And so for me that was kind of weird and interesting. I grew up in a family that was very involved in church. My uncle is a Missouri Synod pastor, and I grew up only staying for a lay person that was professional in the church, and I thought she was wonderful. But that I saw my mother being so active in what I would call the social justice arm of the Lutheran Church. And so I saw her then helping out, and I'm talking many, many hours a day, a year, at Lutheran Social Services. And those agencies do counseling, adoption services, they feed people, they shelter people, they do a lot of refugee services. For instance, now we have refugees from all over the world, but I grew up understanding about and going with my mom and cleaning a new apartment and putting in dishes and beds and sofas and other furniture in order to make the place wonderful for all the people who are coming, buying clothes for each of them and their children, stocking all of the pantry and the refrigerator with food. That's kind of what I did as a child. It was not uncommon for me to come home during the day and coming back from school and my mom saying, I need you to get in the car with me because we need to transport a child that's being adopted from this house to this house, and I need you to help care for the child while we're in transit. So that's kind of how I grew up. That's kind of what happened. Don't know, you know why that I would want to be a social worker. And I do have a master's degree in social work. But I really feel like the Lutheran Church and social work kind of go hand in hand. For me, they go together. And I thought about I went to a Methodist college. I went to a Methodist church after I graduated from college, and I really thought, as I was being called into the ministry, I don't need to necessarily go to a Lutheran church and be a Lutheran pastor, but that's kind of how it worked out, how God kind of pushed me and kind of closed some doors and opened others, and here I am, and I'm a Lutheran pastor myself. I'm a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which means that that is a part of the Lutheran churches that do ordain women, and so I'm lucky enough to be able to do that, to be able to do my call. That's wonderful. The reason why I think that it fits for me, my just being Christian and being Lutheran in particular, and not and a member of another denomination, though I feel at home in so many, is that the Lutherans, we have 300 Lutheran social service agencies in the United States that do the refugee services and the counseling and adoptions and financial assistance and shelter and food. But we also have disaster response teams all over the world that are on the ground. So when something happens, like the earthquake, we're already there on the ground, and that's a big part of what we do and what we give money to. I particularly love that we have a hunger appeal in 60 countries, and we give $115 million a year. I like it that we do our malaria campaign, so that each year we give $15 million in order to fight that horrible, horrible disease that's killing people, hurting children, hurting families. When I was a campus pastor for 17 years at Colorado State University, I took several trips to Germany in order to kind of talk to the students about what it is to be Lutheran and what it was to be around in Luther's time, and that I was able to take them to the church where Luther tacked up those 95 Theses and talk to them really about what it is to be reforming right now. That's what it is to be Lutheran. We reform, we change, we move, we shake up, we do things. I think Luther is most known for his phrase that salvation by grace through faith alone. And not that works aren't good, but they go along with, but we don't focus on works. But notice that I've talked a lot about how I connect with the church, and it's all about works, right? That what we do and how I move, that's part of my personality. But I certainly understand just being able to sit and say that I can receive God's love. And that's just what happens, that God loves me. I love that we had several people, Lutherans that were in Germany during World War II that lived, or many didn't live, through the Holocaust. One of them, I was able to stay in his home, and his name is Pastor Martin Niemöller, and I took students there, and we stayed in the home where he was taken by Hitler. Martin Niemöller was a U-boat captain in World War I. He was German, and so he was a decorated veteran for the German army, but then he became a pastor. And when Hitler started mounting up things in Germany, Martin Niemöller was against all that he did. And so he was taken in 1937 by Hitler's army and was in 3 concentration camps. He survived all of them because there are people every month in his church, hundreds of people would come, and they had to build a separate station with what we would call the train station in that neighborhood, so people could come, and they prayed for him all the time, hundreds and hundreds, to pray for him to let him survive the war. And he's one of the people who started the World Council of Churches. Also, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is perhaps a really well-known theologian by Lutherans because he was in Germany. He taught in Germany, and he and his brother-in-law and several other people had a plot to kill Hitler. They were obviously successful at doing that, and then he had some wonderful writings that he wrote from jail, and he was killed right before the end of the war. Note that Lutherans are gearing up around the world because in 2017, on October 31st, we have the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther putting that piece of paper on that church door. And so this celebration is going to be different than the others. because we are celebrating with the Catholics. And that is very significant that we can do that, because in 2008, the Lutherans and the Catholics got together and said, what do we agree about? And how wonderful is that we were able to get done and be able to say, this is what we agree on. And so we now have been able to go through and say what Luther didn't like in 1517, the Catholics no longer do. And so isn't that wonderful? There are other things to kind of iron out, but it's going really, really well. And so today we are grateful for all the things that are, all the great celebrations that are planned in order for these churches worldwide to be able to say, we celebrate each other. You are our friends, you're our brothers and sisters in Christ, and we are happy to be able to come to the table with you. And so that is, yeah, really happy about it. So, thank you.
Lionel, can we ask questions?
Sure, go ahead. I don't know if I can answer them, but I will.
Lionel's got time for it, that's what I'm concerned about.
If you breathe in and breathe out real quickly, we probably have time.
Actually, it's not. So I'm interested in where Martin Luther, what his decision was to move away from the Catholic Church and the popes, and how he did that, and how he connects with Calvin.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure about all the connections with Calvin. So I'm not a real expert on that. My daughter probably more at this point, but Luther never wanted to break away from the Catholic Church. That wasn't what he wanted to do at all. He wanted to just have a discussion, and so I think that excommunication from him was very, very painful. I think that he had that was very, very difficult for him. It was hard, and as that they really thought that he would die, that he would be killed, and so I think there's a lot of why can't we have a discussion? Why can't we talk? And he came up with some really the powers of the time, but no, he never wanted to. He never wanted to leave. He wanted to be able to reform it, but that didn't happen. He never wanted also a religion named after him. That wasn't what he wanted either, and we didn't do those wishes either.
Any more questions, Lana? Any more questions? Time for-
Questions? Yeah, please.
So, I mean, who is Jesus between Catholic and Lutheran? Is it still Son of a God? Is it Trinity?
Yeah, we've never had issues about that.
So that's a
Still,
same
that's
conservation.
we've never had issues about that.
And second short question, if your daughter marries to a Catholic,
If she marries a Catholic, yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, I don't have issues with that, and I think she, because she grew up when I was a campus pastor, and so it was a multi-faith kind of thing. So really, I mean, that if she would marry someone of another faith, she knows that really wouldn't bother us. So yeah. Both my kids know that. Yeah.
How about a Hindu?
Yeah, that's good. Yes. Yeah. Yes, I know. I talked about this before. Yes. So, yeah, but I am, other Christians in the room can say how what you guys think about this, but I think, but I'm much more multi-faith than maybe my colleagues, and I do a lot more multi-faith work like Rev. Christie than a lot of my colleagues, so I'm an odd duck. I'm also an odd duck because I came to ministry from working with survivors of sexual and domestic violence, and that's how God called me into the ministry, and so I am a totally odd duck because of that too. So, yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
You had mentioned that a lot of the things that Luther had originally had, how it all began, and because of the issues he had with how the church was going.
Right.
You said now the church no longer does those. There's some minor things that are different.
Right.
I mean, the separation was for that reason. So if that reason is gone, would you guys then become part of the same church?
Actually, Lutherans are then making some very formal, large agreements. Like, for instance, there's no Episcopalians here, but for instance, that we have what's called a concordant with the Episcopal Church. And so I could serve in an Episcopal church at any time. And there are a lot of Lutheran Episcopal churches, campus ministries, other entities. Same way with, and we're getting closer with the Methodists, the Presbyterians, UCC Disciples of Christ. So those boundaries are being blurred now more and more. How wonderful is that? But with the Catholics, we have some large things that aren't being done. Like, for instance, ordination of women. That's something that
That they don't do.
no, they don't
Yeah.
do, and that's not something that they would, I think, give up at this point. And so we then agree to disagree, though when we come to the table, we always send several women clergy and clerics to those meetings. They're on it, so they have to know that that's what they're dealing with. We don't hide the women away, they come and are part of everything. Also then we ordain gay and lesbian and transgender folks that are partnered. And so that's not necessarily done in the Catholic Church right now either. So
What do you mean ordained?
ordain.
When you say ordained, you don't have female pastors, but you ordain gay lesbians?
Well, yeah, we have female pastors, obviously. I'm one, but
Yes, she's one.
but then we also ordain gays and lesbians, bisexual, transgenders, but with
Oh, I see.
that are partnered. So
Good.
yeah. So those are some things, but I think it's very positive what's going on. So those talks are, gosh, it's much different than when I was young. So this is we're just looking really good, I think. So there are over 1,000 like Christian groups. There's so many denominations. Stuff we just keep, we have a fight and then we just split off and we go somewhere else. And I mean, it's incredible. The Christians are the most divided religion in the world.
Everybody, yeah.
Everybody else.
Except you don't know it.
Uh-huh.
Grass is always greener on other side.
Side, yes. It's sad. So we're trying to get back together. So yeah, doing that. It takes years of work, and every time we come to the table with another denomination, that's 10 years of work with that. So once you come to the table, you're there for years, and until you die, or I don't know. But anyway, you have to go with it and keep with it for a long time. So that's all good. It's all good. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.